You're now plugged in to the Delphi podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Delphi podcast. I am delighted today to be joined by one of the co-founders and the creative lead of Gunzilla Games, who have just dropped, off the grid, the big AAA Battle Royale that I won't stop banging on about. Neill, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Perhaps for those that might not be familiar with some of your work, you could kick us off with a bit of a background on you and kind of an introduction on the projects that you've worked on historically.
Okay. I mean, I come from the world of film, not video games. And I've directed a few science fiction films. And before directing films, I was in visual effects as an animator. So I have a background in computer graphics, which has always made me interested in gaming. So I went from visual effects to directing commercials and music videos, and then my goal was always films, and from there to feature films. So I was going to direct a live action version of Halo, which collapsed, and out of the burning wreckage of that film, I ended up making District 9, and then I made Elysium, and then I made Chappie, and then I made Gran Turismo recently, and I'm about to do a new science fiction film now. But the last 3 years have been pretty full on with the world of games to me, and working at Gunzilla on Off the Grid.
Awesome. Yeah, I must admit that one of the initial points of intrigue and excitement for me was learning of your involvement. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about, what was that journey like into Gunzilla like, right? To kind of make that transition. And seems like there had always been some desire to do something around games and a passion for it. But what was that journey into it like?
Well, like I said, I mean, I'd always had this fascination with computer graphics, and I think I come at this project or this industry from a very different perspective than most people would, because for me the most interesting part of it is, I mean, other elements have become interesting as I've learned more about it, but the initial way in for me was an obsession with real-time graphics, really. That's really my primary thing. And before Unreal was as sort of dominant as it is now, I had done a bunch of projects in Unity. I hadn't made games in Unity, but I'd made short films in Unity, and I'd also made photogrammetry sequences in a film called Demonic using Unity. And so there was a real interest for me in the idea of creating a world that people could experience in 3 dimensions that looks as photorealistic as you can make it look with current technology. And that just is super interesting to me, and the ability to move around in 3D and have sound change and your whole perspective, depending on where you are on the level of the map, sort of adjust to the player's perception. I love this idea. And I've been flirting with that for 20 years, so what happened was Gunzilla contacted me. Actually, Richard Morgan contacted me, who was he was part of the narrative team at Gunzilla initially. I think he was one of the first people ever in the company that Vlad had hired, and I had been actively very aware of the fact that I wanted to do something with games. And so when Richard emailed me, he was like, "Look, we're building a battle royale as the first game that Gunzilla makes. Do you want to find out more about this and just kind of it's very early, kind of start talking to the company and just see what you think." So I met Vlad that way. And for people who don't know, Vlad is the CEO of Gunzilla. And my involvement just became pretty intense very quickly, and very early on, which is what led to the notion of being a co-founder, I suppose. And one thing that I wasn't expecting was that I actually brought quite a few people to the company. This was like not something at all that I had anticipated, but as it became clear that there were like gaps in certain areas, there were people that made sense to me. Some of them from the film industry that could kind of fill those gaps. And one of them ended up being an absolute rock star. He wasn't from necessarily only the film industry. I'd worked on concept art with him in the film industry, but he'd actually also been in the games industry. And that ended up being Nick Gecko, who's now in charge of the entire art department at Gunzilla. So there were a bunch of I think good moves with hires that just came from my background. which was which was cool because I didn't expect that. I thought it would just be like purely creative. So that's really like the sort of early backstory of how I got involved.
That's awesome. And yeah, I guess like quite a big decision, right? To finally pull the trigger on, committing a ton of time and energy to something like this. Like, yeah, I guess I'm curious out of like, I assume there are many things that kind of had the potential to materialize over the years. You mentioned that, Halo movie or whatever.
Mm.
What was it about like Vlad in particular and Gunzilla and the setup and the idea that made you feel like this was the right thing to pull the trigger on?
Well, I mean, Vlad is a total character. It's hard to not like Vlad. He- um, I mean, he strikes me as like he's like a quintessential sort of founder, right? Of this idea of an entrepreneur who has founded something, who's very passionate about it, and um, can kind of get people around him to be passionate about that vision, which is in the world of film, that's normally what directors are doing. In the world of the more entrepreneurial sort of landscape of founding actual companies, there's something similar to it, but it's like a vision holder of what the company is, you know. And I can be a vision holder of something creative, but it's interesting to see someone who had to line up the financing and line up all of these different elements, and then also figure it out for the first time because the company was sort of being built as the product was being built. But I don't know. It felt like I've always liked the more kind of scrappy, smaller underdog way of approaching things. Like I went through something similar with Oat Studios with what I wanted to build, and it felt like a way that you could make a game without there being too many sort of parents in the room that are overseeing what you're doing. And like this feeling you very much get from Hollywood, and you also get from massive publishers in the game industry, which is like this feeling of top down control and sort of manipulation of the art that you're trying to make. And Gunzilla felt very free from that. And that was something that I think was like super super interesting to me. It's like you don't have the stability or the sort of track record or the reputation or anything that comes with other bigger companies, but you do have the ability to be a much more nimble, dangerous fighter jet instead of a 747. And it just that whole mentality just sort of resonates with me. It's always resonated with me.
I love that. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that excites me about this. Some of the stuff you guys are showing me at the offices and like the kind of edginess and the very like
Mm.
non-PC kind of angles that you
Yeah.
can take, I think is amazing. And like I'm sure yeah, people are going to see more and more of that in terms of the creative outlet that kind of comes with that as well. But no, definitely one of the things that I feel strongly about that. I guess also curious, just to hear it from you. I mean, we did have Vlad on the podcast, so some people will have heard a bit of an overview, but really wanted to hear it from you, like from the creative lens, like in as you see it, like what is Off the Grid? What is this universe? Would love to give people the rundown.
I mean, I can give you the rundown of what it is now, or I can explain how we got there, because it's like they're sort of two different things. Like which one should I start off with?
You know what? Let's do the one of how you got there, because as you
Okay.
say, you joined. There were certain things in place already. This is maybe something you could touch on. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, so basically, what happened when I joined was one of the things that I thought was genius that Vlad was adamant about was the idea of interchangeable cyber limbs, and this idea of sort of player characteristics being transferable by getting different limbs. I thought this was like a really cool idea, and that those are basically assets as well. Um, and so it's like that automatically tells you it's cyberpunk in some way. And then
Mm-hmm.
there you're because of the concept of a battle royale, you're into this idea of some kind of island or a fixed piece of land that's going to remain your sort of stomping ground for the duration of the game. And you can unlock more and more areas, but you're really like you have this sort of fixed square kilometers of land. And so what I inherited was Richard Morgan had written a backstory to how that island was created, which involved a space elevator, and the cyber limbs that Vlad, from a sort of game design perspective, was obsessed with. And so I just started we started to riff on the world that could be built that sort of made sense to me from a science fiction background around those parameters. And for quite a long time, it was quite serious in tone. And I remember this call where I phoned Vlad and I was like, I just think we're making a mistake because there's so many games out there that are serious in tone. And it's like you look at Call of Duty or PUBG or anything else. It's like, why don't we do something that's more satirical? Why can't it be sort of, have biting satirical teeth? And this is what led to the idea that I'm in love with now that we have, which is that it's so like, okay, we still need to do more work and make sure that this gets into the game completely because it is, it's sort of in open access sort of beta mode at the moment. But this idea that three gaming corporations join together, three fictitious gaming corporations like Crack Division and UB Hard and a few others like gather together to form a consortium that's wealthy enough to create a real world battle royale. So the first thing they need to do is bring players back from the dead, right? So like if 99 out of 100 players die in a battle royale, and these are real people that are real gamers from the US or Europe or wherever, and they think that they're tough enough to compete, they get taken to the island. They all fight. Almost all of them die. You have to be able to bring them back, or no one will ever agree to a real life battle royale. So they buy this technology from the military called regen, which within a 2-hour window of death will bring you back. And depending on the severity of the death, like if you get blown up in an IED, that could be like 6 months of rehab in a hospital. And if it's just a single gunshot wound to the heart, it could be like a few hours and you could be back. um, and so it's like set in the near satirical future where people are sort of tired of just being stuck behind screens and they want more of a real world sort of NBA, NFL vibe to gaming. And so this island, this Jurassic Park style real world island becomes a place that players get taken to and dropped into. And it's like the 2003 Japanese film Battle Royale, but like as a game, with massive corporate sponsors and basically just the scale of the Super Bowl.
It's awesome. I love so much of that. I honestly found when I first saw the clips as well of the regrowing people from tissue samples and stuff. It was
Yeah.
super exciting to see. You mentioned it's like something that needs to be worked on more. Like what are some of the ideas you have to like more emphatically communicate this stuff? I think one of the key insights around launch, right, was that like the TikTok, the Zoomer generation, whatever, are not going to sit through the 2-minute intro video
No.
and like maybe some of the narrative and the structuring was lost on them. So yeah, would love to double click on like some of the ways that you guys are really planning to kind of like hammer that home and really emphasize that aspect of the lore.
Yeah, I mean, most of that has to occur in the game, really, right? So you're talking about the lobby, your very quick interstitial sort of cutscenes that take you from the lobby to your jump jet to fly to the island, and then mostly it's the actual island. It's just it's what you tell the players through the level design and through the audio that they're hearing. And in death, very small intelligent cutscenes that tell you what's happened, so you get this overall feel of it. And I mean, each one of these iterations is sort of like a year of work, right, to like really implement it and get it right and make it feel that way. So we were designing the island and building all of the weapons and the cyberlimbs and all of the characters, and like we were doing cool stuff in there. Like we were building armored vests and all of the helmets and everything in the real world, and then scanning them, photogrammetry scanning them, and then bringing them into the game. So like we were doing cool stuff, but we weren't aligned exactly. We hadn't reached the satirical point yet. And so as maybe 6 months out from the release of the version that's playable now, we really doubled down on like how this is the right way to go. And so now we have, I've already kind of sort of created concept art on how to implement the stuff into the island and the sort of next layer of paintbrush strokes to bring that to life on the island. And that's the other thing that's crazy coming from film, is this concept that it's a living, breathing place that is iteratable over time. I mean, this is a very unusual thing for people that are trained in like beginning, middle, and ends in a linear, non-interactive environment. It's a very, very different way of thinking.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I'm curious, like, yeah, what other insights have sort of like sprung up as to those kind of differences between the film and like the actual world building, right? Like, I'd imagine there's lots of stuff around like even just sort of like narrative coherence, all this kind of stuff. When you have like players have agency in these environments, right, in a way that
Mm.
an audience doesn't really in film. So yeah, curious what else has stood out to you.
Well, I mean, I guess there's two main things that are immediately obvious. The one is that any choice that you make kind of has recursive effects through the entire production uh, chain. So in film, it's like if you make a creative choice, you just make a creative choice. Maybe you have an argument with the studio, maybe not, or an argument with the lead actor or whatever it is, right? Or you don't, and you just implement it. In this case, you make a creative change, you may cause frame per second issues. You could cause like, you may be outside of the available usage of like RAM. There's millions of different sort of knock-on effects from it. If you want a whole bunch of NPCs, you're into like what is your sort of low-level AI allotment for what these, how many NPCs you can have. Um, and for destruction, it's like is it on the server side or the client side, or like who's seeing what in terms of what you're destroying. So the one thing is that simple choices have very large recursive effects, and the other one that's probably the biggest deal is this a continuous concept of optimization, and just trying to not overload whoever's GPU it might be, that you're getting an acceptable frame rate. And like on launch, I know this was a problem on PC
Mm-hmm.
because we had so much stuff. And like, from my perspective, it's like you want it to look as good as possible. And I am kind of obsessed with Counter-Strike, but I'm not a really good player, right? So my brain doesn't really work that way, where it's like just pure FPS. Now, and obviously that is what players care about. So, Gunzilla at the moment is in a phase of just really like geometric and texture and memory optimization to try to get the FPS to a point that's like extremely acceptable to everyone. And that is very counter to the world that I come from, which is like just, really like artwork and creativity, and it's a different thing, right? You're in more of a technical space where you just want to make the experience as extremely real time as you can for the player.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you're sort of bouncing back and forward between those two things.
Yeah, it was interesting to see people, doing editing custom configs and stuff. You put all
Yeah,
that hard work into designing this amazing
yeah,
environment, this amazing world,
yeah,
and everyone just
exactly. Turn
doubts
off
everything
turn
to
off
see
shadows. Yeah,
it.
turn off haze. Turn off
Yeah,
everything. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
800 FPS.
exactly. Well, all credit to the team. It's running incredibly smoothly now and looks stunning. So excited
Mm,
for all of that. You touched a little bit on, actually designing these props and assets in real life and scanning them, doing the photogrammetry and, importing these super high quality assets. I'd love to understand a bit more about like that process alongside, building these like insanely grungy, gritty, like cyberpunk worlds or sci-fi worlds, rather dystopian worlds that you've worked on with stuff like District 9 and Elysium. Like, yeah, how's that influenced this whole process? Like building, Teardrop Island and this,
mm.
sort of disheveled battle arena. Yeah, how what's carried across?
Well, I want to get more disheveledness into there as time goes on. So like I want to make it more and more disheveled. But some of that is technical, and some of it is just like artistic preference, right? Like I grew up in South Africa, and in Johannesburg there's sort of areas of wealth and areas of poverty, and you get this. It's textually extremely rich, and that was in District 9, and it also carried over into Elysium, where you again have extreme wealth and extreme poverty, which is kind of like Johannesburg sort of distilled into science fiction. Um, but that also, like, I'm a very visual artist, I guess, and that kind of discrepancy and also just visual richness is just something that interests me. Like I can appreciate like much more clean clinical science fiction, and I like it, but it's like my own mind doesn't necessarily go that way, unless that's just the wealthy part of like there needs to be this yin and yang positive and negative kind of balancing. And you know what the place that we've gotten to with Off the Grid now is very much like that, right? Like where you have, it's kind of like the Running Man. Like you have like the network and the sort of wealth and the power of the network, which in our world is the enclave, which is above the island, and then down on the island surface is really like the blood and the carnage, right? So um so I, you know, that's just a purely creative thing, and I some of it is sort of referenceable. Like I think of the Enclave very much like Century City in LA, and a lot of the building designs. I mean, by the way, players can't get up there now. It's not open
Hmm.
as part of the map, and also we haven't really released a lot of the cutscenes that we've shot in there, and also we were going to do a lot more. But the Enclave really is, it's almost like if you think of an oil rig with giant steel pillars and on, but it's much bigger than an oil rig, and then on the top of that surface you can have a bunch of the corporate headquarters of our fictitious game companies. I always thought of that as Century City, and I thought of it like with this kind of LA bleached sunlight. You know, like I always wanted the island to be super sunny, and
Mm.
very particularly this LA kind of like light that hit it. And so you have that, and then you have all of the wealth of the sort of corporate executives, and then on the player level you have people that are, if you made a film out of this, you'd have players that are signing up to try to, you know, win the battle royale, and maybe they're paying for, like, you know, cancer treatment for a family member or something, right? So it's like this depravity that's happening on the island. And then also like potentially very famous players that gain a following, that are good at killing people, that become like these sort of sociopathic uh, influences that people love, you know. And then they start getting contracts with, you know, Nike or Dior or whatever to have like cooler
Mm.
and cooler armor and outfits and shit, which is like all of the direction that we want to go. So, you know, that's on a sort of creative level that makes sense to me. And then the creation of some of those elements is a process that I love, which is sort of digitizing real world stuff and bringing it into 3D. I wanted to do that actually with a lot of the buildings and the locations on the island, you know, to just photogrammetry real life locations.
Mm.
But again, you run into this extremely complicated technical stuff where you're not making a film and you're making an environment that has to be renderable at a very high frame rate. So all of a sudden, you know, retopologizing some super high density geo object that is, you know, a cracked building from the center of Johannesburg with high resolution texture maps is just not the most
Yeah.
intelligent way to go about it. So then it's like, then you have artists just modeling that building from scratch in a kind of optimized way. But we could do it with certain things, like a lot of the armor, like the vests and, you know, the clothing really that you can use, that you can customize your character with. Um, a lot of that stuff has been built by Weta, that I've worked with in film, that Weta Workshop, not Weta Digital, Weta Workshop that builds physical stuff. And then Richard Simpson, who is my production designer at Oats, built a lot of the stuff, and now we have a third team in the US building stuff for us. So it's, you know, like that stuff is really creatively kind of rewarding. Like I love, you know, you can go into a workshop and physically touch the fabrics and the
Mm.
materials and stuff, and then put them on mannequins and scan them, and then bring them into 3D. So that stuff is pretty cool.
That's super cool. I'm still hoping for my Cyberlim replica at some point. We'll have to make it happen. It would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, actually, right now we are there's a company that's building wearable cyberlimbs for us for a live action piece that I want to shoot.
That's very cool.
Like the way that we have these interstitial pieces between, you know, like on essentially loading the map, we have these live action pieces, right, which I shot long ago, and I've shot a whole lot more that we're working on at the moment, and we're going to shoot more. So the wearable cyberlimbs are for pieces that are upcoming.
That's really cool. Yeah, for those that
Maybe
don't
you
know,
can
that
you can have one of those. We can
y-
find a way for Piers to get one of those limbs.
yes, please. That would be cool. But yeah, for those that don't know, there's been a ton of these yeah, little clips as well, these live action pieces of like leaked like Department of Defense footage of these cyberlimbs in testing, and kind of as anticipated by Neill, these have been going viral on TikTok and other social media lately. It's really cool to see people in the comments being like, you know, what movie is this? And then realizing it's actually a game world that's being built here.
Mm.
Um You kind of touched on it a little bit, talking about the Enclave and some of these other pieces, but like, what more can you tell us about the narrative and where the like sort of conflict around this world is going? Obviously, we know there's these three big game developers that have teamed up. Like, yeah, what else can you tell the audience about where this is all going?
Well, I don't want to give too much away because, a lot of that will actually be our kind of eventually our narrative campaigns that tie into missions on the
Mm-hmm.
island. But one of the core components was when I started thinking of the satirical nature of how to like render off the grid. I immediately wanted to work with Sholto because I love working with him, and he's hilarious. And so I have this loose idea of a so when you hypothetically die on the island, the military technology that this game consortium purchased in a hypothetical near future is this technology called regen, where when you're regrown, if you were totally blown up, or if you're rehabilitated, if you got decapitated or something less extreme than being blown up. Um, Obviously if your brain is damaged, you could have a lot of memory issues and a lot of maybe just psychological issues in general. And so I had this idea for what I contacted Shaw with was essentially the face of OTG. I felt like there was at first we needed a character that was like the face of the game. And if you look at PUBG, you have this player, anonymous player in a welding mask and a tie and a shirt, and it's very iconic and very instantly recognizable. And I wanted
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And so the idea was this soldier who had been experimented on as part of the early regen lab trials. And when the game consortium had purchased Regen, which by the way creates other satirical problems, like people that are in car accidents or have terminal diseases and stuff, like the game company is not releasing this technology to them, right? So the whole
Yeah.
planet is like not happy about it. But Schultz's character, which his name is Cobra, was sort of purchased as part of that, the buying of the technology, because he was this lab rat that had come from the U.S. Army and had been killed multiple times and brought back to life. So the core idea was when the gaming company bought him, they wanted a face for the game, and they wanted him to basically become like a streamer, right? Because he's sort of like a Twitch streamer who can actually, but in real life, he's a soldier. So you have this hilarious disparity between someone who should never ever be a Twitch streamer who has no idea and no interest in social media at all, and really is not good at it. And is more like a drill sergeant, right? But has his own very complex memory problems and issues with how many times he's been resuscitated. So that core idea and the idea of this game consortium of executives, where a lot of real world gaming hilariousness, like stupidity around game level design, or why are you prioritizing like real time reflections and particles over FPS. Like these kind of discussions
Mm-hmm.
can actually be worked into the narrative, right? Because they're designing an island. So it's like a mixture of like the Hunger Games talking about a real world place where people die, and um, the Running Man, but fused with the games industry. So a lot of the villains are basically game level designers.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is hilarious. And so a lot of our narrative sort of stems from that and the backstory of how we got to where we are.
Yeah, I love that. I think Cobra already is a hilarious character. I'm excited for to see much more of him. And yeah, I mean,
Mm,
as we've discussed, right, some of the ways with like sort of shortening the feedback loop of being able to actually get stuff in game, working with the mocap rigs and everything. I think
yeah.
yeah, going to be very cool to have something much more reactive to that effect with a character that really does feel alive, right, and like
Mm,
living in that world with the players. Um,
hmm
yeah, very very excited to see where all of that goes for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of like giving Shaw the ability to record stuff. Like I think we're building him a small motion capture facility in his garage in LA because the company is based in Frankfurt and the motion capture stuff is in Frankfurt. And then the mocap that I do for the narrative stuff is in Prague. So giving Shaw in LA a small studio to either have a couple of other actors come in with him, or even just for him to riff on stuff the way that you're sitting behind a mic. It's like has his own show, and Cobra can kind of like do whatever he wants whenever he wants, and we can just upload it. It's a pretty cool way of approaching the character.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very excited to see how all of that unfolds. And you touched on the like narrative campaign and how that's going to unfold. Is there anything you can tell us about like, yeah, the thought process around like weaving that into like, when you think battle royale, you definitely don't think narrative campaign. So how are you guys approaching this?
Well, this core idea is another thing that Vlad was completely obsessed about, right? Like it was the concept of cyberlimbs. He reiterated many times this idea that the game should feel like Elysium, which is how I initially got contacted, was like make it feel like Elysium. And then thirdly, the idea of narrative campaigns happening in the middle of a battle royale, which has been contentious like since day one, really, right? Where it's like why aren't they occurring outside of the BR? And he is obsessed with this idea of them occurring during the battle royale and figuring out how to do it. And we've actually tested some versions of missions that seem to work, right? Like you just have to put the player in a way in an environment where they cannot be killed, so they can kind of offline for 45 seconds to watch something. And you have to, if you're in trios, you've got to figure out like where in the narrative journey the other players are. I mean, all of this stuff is like outside of the spectrum of what I have experience in. There's people like Pete Cherkas who are like very experienced in trying to figure this out and like know what they're doing. But for me and for Shaw, it's more about just worrying about like what that story is, and then coming up with satirical ideas that can be um, implemented into gameplay. So the mission that you actually receive and the narrative footage that you watch is obviously like the best experience would be that that's backed up by something that you're retrieving or terminating or doing something to and cause an effect on the island, right? And then your competitive flip side of that, the yin and yang flip side, is that another team is given the exact mirror mission, the exact opposite of what your goal is. And so you have these ways of learning narrative that I think it's a super cool idea. I mean, it's a really, really cool way of doing it. So Shaw and the narrative team are figuring out the narrative, and then the game designers are figuring out how to implement it.
Yeah, super interesting. Excited to see how that piece evolves for sure. I think there's a number of different approaches that would work there. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, one of the things I'm curious for your perspective on is like obviously films, gaming, you're sort of straddling both here. Like how do you anticipate this whole sort of overlap or whatever dynamic between them is going to evolve? Like obviously in recent years we've seen an explosion of like sort of transmedia strategies, right, around books into film into games, TV shows. I mean, we've had some really big notable recent examples that seem to have like actually captured like a lot of mainstream attention. Stuff like The Last of Us, I was really impressed with the execution on, right? Like people that I really didn't expect to like that absolutely loved it. And so yeah, what are your thoughts on that broadly? And are we going to see OTG cinema on Netflix anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, when you say people weren't gonna like, you didn't expect them to like Last of Us and they did, do you mean like people that weren't gamers that watched the show and then liked
Absolutely.
the
I mean,
show?
like,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, like my wife, like all my friends that are, it's like,
right.
it came from a video game. I always
It's
stood
a
by The Last of Us
it's
being
a well-made show.
100%. I also always stand by The Last of Us being one of the most incredible stories ever, right? Across any, like, it's
Mm,
absolutely heartbreaking. It's so
mm,
wonderful. Yeah, the way that it explores the breakdown of humanity and like, what that
yeah,
exposes in ourselves, all that kind of stuff. But it was an incredible conversion, I would say,
yeah.
adaptation. But still, I was surprised, right? Everyone really loved it that watched it, anecdotally, of course. But yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you're asking a really complicated question. Like, I think there's, and it also depends on what timeline, you're sort of discussing it. Because
Mm,
I think one thing that's perceivable in quite a sort of a narrow timeline, like the sort of now to near future timeline, that is interesting is this slow shift from films and TV being the dominant media to games and social media being the dominant media. Like sort of millennial Gen Z kind of vibes. It's like as you move into further down this timeline, you kind of start seeing films placed on shelves like DVDs, almost like the way that cinema replaced books.
Mm.
And books were still very much in society, but they weren't like as dominant as films and TV were. And so Last of Us is a perfect example where instead of the games industry sort of pilfering from the film industry, you have this situation now where the film industry is looking at they're looking at giant games like Last of Us and saying like, can we please turn this into our old school media, for
Mm.
people to absorb. So millions of gamers already played that narrative campaign, and now the rest of the world sort of gets the passive version of it, right? So I do think you're going to start seeing more and more films that are made up out of games as opposed to games that are made out of films. Um, but that's near term. I mean, longer term, I kind of I think the best summary is that it's just basically way too unpredictable because of AI.
Hmm.
It's just like completely outside the realm of like human predictability, I think. Like the power of what AI is as a tool and what it's able to generate, I think 10 years from now or 20 years from now, you're in a landscape that is just, it's
Yeah.
almost like customized, individually rendered worlds that are modifying based on what it thinks you want, like at that time of the day. Like I mean, it's beyond
Yeah.
prediction almost. Um, but I think one thing that's interesting is when people, this concept of player agency and like exploring three-dimensional worlds, it's like you can kind of see games becoming a little bit like Ready Player One or a virtual world where you can do things that humans can't do in the real world. Like you can rob banks or like get into a police chase or kill people or like whatever it is. And the sort of render quality and everything else is extremely high, and like that's clearly where we're going, right? It's like immersive experiences for people, but that kind of player agency and what people look for in non-linear environments, I think, is not the same thing as what films and books provide. Because what's
Hmm.
happening in films and books is some person has a point of view on life or on experience that they're distilling into written words or into a film that the person reading or watching that film is absorbing the world as seen through this person's eyes.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like it's an experience of that person's, like say a person goes through like a really terrible divorce, right? And you haven't been divorced, you can watch a moving film on this topic that might affect you, and it's kind of like a simulation of that thing. And when you give people agency over that story, you change the dynamic slightly because it's like now that's what you would do, right? But it's like
Hmm.
this is how this played out for this person, and we kind of that's how humans kind of learn. So there's a I think that there will always be a place for human perception of emotional events that are almost transferred in this kind of meme-like way through narrative linear storytelling that I'm not sure can really be replaced exactly by no matter what the render level is of like a non-linear
Hmm.
real-time environment that a player has agency over. So yeah, I don't know where it's going, but it's like there does seem to be some sort of fusion between the creative concepts and
Mm.
when you throw AI into the mix, it's just like all bets are off.
For sure. I think that's really interesting, though, the point that, like, a director in a film, like, crystallizes a particular perspective and, yeah,
Mm.
communicates something, in a particular
Yeah,
manner. I think they can be
yeah,
hugely complementary, right? Like, I'd love to see your take on as I say, OTG cinema series where it's like, this is from the perspective of the boots on the ground on the island, like, whatever, the stuff unfolding. I think that shit would be super cool and only
mm,
add to the
mm,
enjoyability of people being able to direct their own
yeah.
journeys and experiences in there, too.
Yeah, and the thing that's cool about, the world that we've ended up with now that I feel really passionately about is that it really it suits the game well, and we need to like really, finish fleshing out the island and everything to make that feel the way that it should feel. But it's also highly it's rich it's rich data for a TV show or a film,
Hmm.
because it kind of it really, there's a lot of elements that to me as a creative person make sense to me, like the sort of social commentary, very high satire, you know, hyper violent kind of thing that it is very appealing to me. So whether it's a Netflix series or film, it's like it's appealing.
Yeah, it definitely seems well suited to it. You didn't mention it earlier in the movies you referenced, but I don't know whether I mentioned it to you before. But that 2008 movie with Gerard Butler called Gamer,
Mm.
where it's like these
Yeah.
lifetime prisoners, whatever, and the only way out is they get these like neural links that allow players, kids, like fighting in a VR game to actually control their bodies. That kind of
Mm.
stuff was quite cool. I always thought, as an actual game concept, it would have also been quite cool. That idea of like,
Yeah.
yeah, the pair between the operator and the operated and the like dialogue between them, I thought was quite cool in the film.
You know, I've never seen that film. I need to watch it. Like a lot of people in Gunzilla reference Gamer a lot, like with this concept that we're doing. And I keep meaning to check it out, and I just haven't. I've seen clips from it, so like I'm clear on what the idea is, but I
Mhm.
need to watch the whole movie.
It's like whatever. It's cool conceptually. It's a bit of a crappy execution, is all I'll say. But check it out.
Okay.
But anyway, I'll keep my fingers crossed for some downstream. As I say, I think it would be so cool to have like yeah, more formal media series to complement this. Although obviously
Mm.
there's already the like OTG cinema stuff that does exist, right? These different chapters. Like is there anything you can like give us just a like what's your intent with that stuff? Where's that stuff getting worked in? There's only like I think there's only one publicly available, maybe two now. Like what's the plan with all of that?
Well, some of those were will also be incorporated into like early mission designs, where some of that will be narrative that players are able to play. But the thing the thing that's really kind of hilarious, I mean, I keep coming back to how much I like the core idea of what Off the Grid is now, but if you imagine a fictitious game consortium that is tasked with the idea of putting narrative into the real life battle royale, right? It means that you're creating content for the players to play that is made by the synthetic company. So another way of saying this is we will have scenes where you'll get an ultra serious Call of Duty style, you know, totally serious Michael Bay Born Identity like piece of footage. It's like super cool. And then as soon as it ends, you'll have corporate executives in the game company talking about it in a totally satirical way. Like,
Yeah,
it's not cool enough. We think we need more of this. We need more of this. We need
yeah,
more of this. The players want this. And so we have to think of narrative almost on two levels. We have to think of the narrative created by the fictitious game company, which is always serious and cool. And then we have to think of the satirical higher level narrative of watching them create the narrative,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
both of them are important. Like they're both part of our story, because sometimes you'll play in-game stuff, which is where OTG Corporation, very much like Gamer or the Hunger Games or the Running Man, has set up a bunch of like obstacles or tasks or goals that you have to do, and in there you'll get the cool cutscenes, right? But then you get a higher level where you see how those cutscenes were created and the true real backstory, which is evolving. So some of the cutscenes that are created now are in the like cool. They're created by the corporate executives, and that's really mostly what's being created. And then now we're starting to create the higher level stuff of like how that stuff was created.
Yeah, I love that. It's so cool having that narrative on multiple levels. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, right? Where Cobra in particular, shout out Shalto, like is sort of asking the questions and pushing back and like taking the piss out of
Yeah,
like, the developers themselves. It's like
yeah,
it's such a funny interplay to be able to use.
yeah.
I really
It's
like it.
super hilarious. I mean, and Shaw is so good at that kind of thing. Yeah, it's gonna be, hopefully it's gonna be pretty cool.
What else in terms of where you see this universe expanding, this lore, like what excites you the most about, I mean, you touched on loads of elements here, but yeah, what excites you about what's coming?
I mean, honestly, like the main focus right now is to just get more of this kind of satire into the player experience on the island, you know? Like this journey between customization to lobby to loadout to the interstitial stuff of the real-time footage of flying to the island, the fight itself, and then the post-match stuff, you know?
Hmm.
Um, like that that's it feels creatively inspiring to try to figure that stuff out, and like we've begun, but that's the next stage. It's kind of like now that the game is up on its feet and like the structure and the skeletal system works and a lot of the core ideas are in there, the creative tuning can be sort of more finely dialed now so that the players really immediately get that.
Makes sense. Yeah, excited to see what comes as more comes in. I think there's stuff coming literally in the next few weeks though, from what I'm told, in terms of some of the, post match stuff and whatnot. So
Yeah, there is
yeah,
some stuff.
eagerly awaiting all of that. I'm curious as well. You kind of touched on something that sounded, it's kind of been a bit of a taboo word at this point after the excess of the 2021 era. But a lot of the stuff you were describing earlier is like, metaverse-esque, right? It's like people that have a total agency, that you have all this interconnected world where you can do, all these things that you can't in the real world.
Mm,
That's always an idea that's excited me enormously. It's something that I really believe like is like a logical eventuality if our, current trajectory persists.
mhm.
And yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts on that whole notion, like as someone that works in a lot of 3D graphics and creative stuff, like about yeah, where the world's going. I assume you've messed around with some of these, wearables and actually new ways to embody these 3D environments. Like, yeah, is that something that excites you or terrifies you, or yeah, how are you thinking about all of that?
Well, I mean, there's definitely no question that uh, the direction that we're going is more and more of this insula cocooning way of staying in an apartment in like a giant megacity and using DoorDash and Amazon to have shit sent to your door while you kind of experience 3D virtual places in whatever capacity. Like that seems to be the road that the human race is on.
Mm,
Um, so and when you look at when you look at Nvidia and what's happening with Nvidia as fueled by AI and just the level of like GPU computational power that's going to be available to us, um, it's totally logical that when you fuse social media with that level of computation, that you it all of those things equals virtual environments, right? Like
mm,
avatars and virtual environments and the level of how much you want to be you versus not you. It's clear that that's coming. Like it interestingly feels more dystopian than I was expecting. Like it does feel like we're kind of in like a sci-fi dystopia to some degree,
mm,
but it's also kind of awesome at the same time because you're creating this weird neural lace that's kind of this finely laced spider web over the planet that you can almost exist on two levels, like just the real world or this higher virtual level.
mm,
And it's very fascinating. I mean, it's highly interesting on a sci-fi level, and it also seems kind of inevitable. There's a lot of stuff around now that does feel like we've crossed from like a theoretical science fiction future to a real one. You know, I'm 45 and like I was born in 79, and it feels like it's like the toad in the boiling water thing where it's like if I think of myself in like 1999, as a 19-year-old getting into computer graphics and working in the film industry, and I think of like what reality is today. It's like I don't know, no one could sort of see that slow. You when you're in it at 45, you don't really realize how many accumulated things have happened that are like you really are living in a slightly science fiction reality.
yeah.
And it feels like we're on the cusp of something very transformative just between AI and the amount of compute power that we have and the also just the sheer interconnectivity as well, right? Like to build pipelines that can send the amount of data that we can send now. Like I'm speaking to you like this. Yeah, so we've built a machine that allows for this, and we're also sort of like culturally training ourselves that it's like that's the better option.
Mm.
So it does seem like the road that we're going down.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's funny you say the like, toad in the boiling water or frog in the boiling water thing. Like one of my favorite things, one of the quotes that I read was like, it's funny how day to day nothing changes, but when you look back, everything's different. And I find that to be so true. Like,
Mm,
I was in discussion with my dad. I was like reflecting on the fact that we know so much about the theoretical path towards shit like Alcubierre drives and warp speed and whatever, that stuff feels like it'll happen at some
Mm,
point. I'm sure of it. The harder
mm,
thing for me to imagine is it really is. It's like, what did the world look like in 1965 when he was born? Like
yeah,
like what was like calling your friends before you go out somewhere and having to meet at a place, and if they weren't there or you were late, you're just fucked. That was your evening done. Go home, kind of thing. Like that's
yeah.
bizarre, right? I do think, as you say, this like membrane that exists around the earth now that's just pulsing
Mm,
with like more and more information, higher and higher fidelity, and like more and more captivating stuff, right? Very much by design.
mm,
It's crazy. I was telling you just before we started recording this as well, attention span's absolutely nuked at the moment. I'm feeling yeah, starting to
yeah.
feel it all.
Well, I mean that ties into what you're saying about your dad in the 60s, where we've built a system by augmenting ourselves with other computational power and networks that is far more complex than we're designed to handle. So
Mm,
I think, getting to the pub and not knowing whether your friends are going to be there or not because you don't have like, an interconnected like 5G cell phone that you can just communicate with them on is how humans are actually designed, and that level, that non-existent low level stress of like just constant interconnectivity is kind of gone. And he's probably just going to get a beer and chill out the way that he would have if he was like in the Roman Empire or like in Sumeria or as, a Paleolithic hunter or whatever. And so all of a sudden we're in this weird hyper connectivity with like an unlimited amount of data and an unlimited amount of entertainment or even just interesting concepts, that you can like whatever your interest is, it's like literally unlimited. So I think that's built a society that has no attention span and is operating outside the upper limit of what humans are designed to do. And it's only going to get worse from here.
mm.
So it's like there's gonna be, personality and psychological problems, and we haven't updated the biology to match with the technology. So it's gonna lead to unpredictable outcomes, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I saw a hint of it earlier where you said, yeah, obviously it's terrifying, but it's also kind of awesome. I agree.
Yeah,
Like I lean to that camp.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's a wonderful and crazy
Yeah.
experiment, and we'll see.
It's also like humanesque. I mean, it's what we do, which is like just kind of stumble dumbly like forward,
Yeah.
regardless of how insane it seems, like and there's no like self-reflection or I mean it's super interesting. It's like each node, which is a human, has its own perception on it, but there's no way to like at the moment to wire the nodes together to get a common consensus of whether this is like a good or bad thing.
Mm.
And so they all individually stumble forward, and we end up, with 5 hours of screen time on an iPhone a day.
Yeah, you'd be lucky to get it down to 5. But anyway,
Mm,
I just want to say, you said updating the biology. There's a quote that I read by this guy, Edward Wilson. It's really cool. It says, the real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And it's
mm.
terrifically dangerous and is now approaching a point of crisis overall. That was written
Yeah,
quite a while
so
ago, but
exactly,
very cool.
exactly true. Yeah. I mean, there's also, like when you look at the Fermi paradox and you look at like alien civilizations, this idea of the great filter or the great barrier is also like a very interesting concept that seems highly, highly relevant, right? Like if you look at the number of stars and if you believe that if you come from a slightly like non-religious POV, which is this idea that it's not the rare earth hypothesis that this is
Mm,
the only planet that will give rise to life, then why is the universe not teeming with life? And it does feel like there is a great filter which is going to separate a civilization that succeeds from one that dies off, and maybe all of them have died off and they keep reaching the same thing, which is like Paleolithic emotions mixed with nukes.
yeah, exactly. There's a great Nick Bostrom paper where he said like why I hope the search for extraterrestrial life yields nothing. He was basically
Mm,
suggesting if they found like a skeleton or something on Mars, then
yeah,
basically it
we're
implies,
doomed.
yeah, because it implies the great filter lies ahead of us still,
Mm,
right? And I love all that stuff.
yeah,
I still think the three body problem, that trilogy, and the Dark Forest like theory was
yeah,
such a
yeah.
cool idea
Yeah.
for that.
The dark forest is really like the core. I mean, it's so evident with the human race, and evident with wild animals that it's like, why
Mm,
wouldn't that apply to galactic or universe scale thermodynamics? It's just energy. It's fighting
totally.
over energy and resources. Like it's going to happen.
Yeah, very cool, very exciting. Now we're running up a little bit on time. I wanted to ask you, what would you regard as the most impactful digital experience you've ever had? Feels like you've explored all sorts
Digital.
of wacky, yeah, digital experience. I feel like you've explored lots of wacky, interesting, angles of this. So curious.
Dude, it's interesting, like the timing of you asking this. I think I just had it like a week ago. And I think it was for the first time I really seriously got into AI image and video generation. And coming from visual effects and seeing what the hell is happening in AI, I was like, okay, I now kind of realize like how much of a shift is coming.
Yeah,
Because if it can do this, if I know what it takes humans to do this imagery with a team of humans and a lot of computational power and pretty advanced human software that we use, and it can do this in a 5-minute render based on like a 300 character text prompt, and it did
yeah.
that, I don't understand what the future holds. So I would say messing around with AI like text to image and image to video software is that. That's I would say.
Wow, that's cool. I love the recency of it too.
Mm,
Yeah, I'm really struggling to wrap my head around it. A lot of this latest stuff out of like Sora and whatnot. You have people that are just in their bedrooms that have just become fascinated by this shit, that are prompted, that are
mm,
generating entire fucking movies. That like, sure,
yeah.
there are some slight inconsistencies from frame to frame around different things, but like, yeah,
Mm.
it's fascinating. I'm yeah, very intrigued. I don't really know what it all means either.
There is this kind of magic that is happening with it as well, where it it's like this the way that it's trained on data and whatever's happening behind that computation is outside of the control of the programmers and it's kind of like giving birth to something
Mm,
that is it's obviously not self-aware, but there's a feeling to us as aware things that it is aware because it's generating stuff that essentially looks like magic. So that disconnect between what is actually happening in the code behind the scenes to derive this image is disturbing and cool.
yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the disturbing part from my perspective is very much like how unbelievably accurately I can project my mind's eye through just text, right? Which is a pretty low
Mm,
fidelity form of communication, right? Like there's so
mm,
many ways to interpret text. And as you
mm,
say, like oftentimes it will render something like bang on. Like you can describe scenes from a book how you imagined it and it
mm.
will literally, it's like that shit's
Yeah,
scary. It's like plucking stuff out of our minds that we like went, could sort of see, and,
yeah,
and doing a really good job of it.
yeah. It's true.
Um, and then, yeah, similarly, wanted to ask, what's the most impactful book you've ever read? Something that stands out.
For sure, The Gone World by Thomas Weddelich.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the super high level summary of that?
The high level summary is it's a murder mystery in in a world where the multiple world hypothesis is real and you can journey between different versions of reality.
Hmm. Okay, sounds sick. I'll check it out. I'll as soon as I get the attention span back in check, I'll
Yeah.
I'll give it a
You may
go.
be kind of boned if you're sort of going into like like a science fiction novel with like a low attention span. You could have like serious problems there. You're gonna have to
Yeah,
like practice
it,
practice
it
for that.
it's been okay historically. I'll
Start
give it
off with like a brochure or something,
yeah,
like
exactly.
just
Exactly.
something
Baby
like low
steps.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Um, and then yeah, lastly, kind of wanted to ask favorite video game ever. I mean, you touched on Counter Strike once or twice here. Is that the one? Curious, what's really shaped your
No, I think
gaming journey.
I mean games today are so impressive. It's actually insane. But I mean the one that probably had the most impact on me that was just like a hugely formative big deal would probably be Half-Life.
Okay, okay,
I would say,
nice.
yeah.
Have you discussed this with
I mean,
Vlad?
it could
Because
also be
he
Doom.
Vlad gave the same answer. Well, specifically Half-Life Deathmatch, which
Really?
is quite cool. Yeah,
What? Are you
yeah,
serious?
yeah. How
Dude,
crazy is that?
I've never he's never told me that. I would love to get
Dude,
into
yo,
Half-Life
I
2 deathmatch
after
with him.
after I recorded with Vlad last week, I've reinstalled it, so we'll have to coordinate and we'll all play together.
Holy
That'd be
shit.
good fun.
Consider me in there, dude. Me with that rebar like crossbow.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
no joke. It's no
Yeah.
joke. Yeah,
Nice.
I will be in there.
Cool. Well, we'll
I'm
have to
I'm
make it
very
happen.
surprised. I'm very surprised by that answer from him.
Yeah, I'm surprised it hasn't
because
come
he's
up with
also
something.
he's like 10 years younger than me, I think. So
Yeah.
it's like I wouldn't, that game seems like, although I suppose it's like Doom to me, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
93.
Dude, I was playing Half-Life when not when it came out, I suppose,
You were
but
like
pretty early.
4, like 2 or something.
Literally, I remember like 2003, 2004, I was using my dad's brand new like Sony Vaio top of the range like laptop, and before bedtime playing Half-Life, spilt hot chocolate all over it. He was pretty
Yeah,
pissed off. But
yeah.
no, I love those games. We should definitely rip it. Yeah, want to thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure talking through all of this. I'm enormously excited to see how OTG evolves. Was awesome getting a bit more of a creative and sort of creative direction overview for our listeners, and excited
Yeah,
to
thank you,
see what
man.
the future holds.
Yeah, cool questions, and yeah, thank you.
Oh, and then I guess, can I ask in finishing, and we can cut it out if not, but are we gonna have a successor to District 9?
Yes, I have to. I really want to make that. Like, yeah, there will be one.
Okay, cool, love to hear
Yeah,
that. Amazing. Neill, thank you for the time. Look forward to seeing it all unfold, and more of this come online in the OTG universe.
yeah. Thank you, Piers.